Snow didn't fall over the riverfront. It hung there, like the city had exhaled, and the air forgot how to breathe back in. Officer Ethan Cole kept both hands on the wheel and let the patrol SUV creep through the last lighted intersection before the industrial district swallowed him whole. The streets here weren't streets so much as wide scars of asphalt, cut through warehouses and fenced yards, stitched together with sodium lamps that buzzed like tired insects. The radio had been quiet for 5 minutes, and that alone made him suspicious. Quiet was never neutral. In the passenger seat, K9 Shadow sat upright, head slightly angled, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the windshield. Shadow didn't pant, didn't fidget. He watched the world the way Ethan did, like it could change shape in a heartbeat. Dispatch had said, "Unresponsive person reported near the intake channel. Possible assault. Caller disconnected." No name, no follow-up, no unit already on scene. Ethan didn't like that. He turned off his headlights 2 blocks out and rolled forward, using only the dim spill of the dashboard. The river fog thickened between the buildings, blurring the edges of everything: fences, loading docks, old signage. A gust pushed a sheet of powder across the road, and Shadow's ears snapped forward. Then Shadow made a sound Ethan almost never heard. Not a bark, not a whine. A low, vibrating warning that started in the dog's chest and climbed into the air like a threat. Ethan's foot came off the gas. "What is it, buddy?" Shadow's nose lifted. The dog didn't look at him. He looked through the windshield, reading the air in layers Ethan couldn't access. Human scent, fresh, not 1, not 2, and something sharper under it, solvent, metal. The cold bite of chemicals that didn't belong in river fog. Ethan pulled onto the shoulder and killed the engine. The SUV settled into silence, and suddenly every small sound sharpened: wind against chain link, distant water moving under ice, the faint creak of a sign swinging on a rusted bracket. Shadow shifted once, controlled, ready. "Stay close," Ethan murmured, slipping his gloves on. He opened his door and stepped into the cold. The air hit like a verdict. Across the road, a narrow service path dropped toward the river intake channel, concrete steps slick with frost. A security light above a gate had been smashed. Glass glittered in the snow like tiny stars. Ethan drew his flashlight, kept the beam low, and walked. Shadow moved at his heel without command, silent, disciplined, locked into the same line of intent. At the broken gate, Shadow paused, nostrils flaring. He angled his head, then looked up at Ethan. That look wasn't fear, it was certainty. Someone was here, recently, and they didn't leave clean. Ethan pushed the gate open with his shoulder. It squealed once, loud in the stillness, and then the river sound rose, a slow, heavy churn beneath ice, like the earth turning over in its sleep. Halfway down the steps, Ethan saw her. A figure on the concrete near the water, curled on her side, one arm under her chest, as if she'd tried to crawl away. Dark hair spread across the frost. One leg bent at an angle that made Ethan's stomach tighten. And beside her, pressed tight against her ribs, was a hard drive, silver, scuffed, smeared with something darker than river mud. Blood. Shadow surged forward 2 steps, then stopped, trained not to rush, trained to wait for Ethan's cue. His body trembled with restraint. Ethan dropped into a crouch at the woman's side. "Ma'am, hey, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. Not unconscious, barely holding on. A line of blood ran from her hairline down to her cheek, frozen in place like a red seam. Her breath came in shallow bursts. Shadow lowered his head and inhaled. Then his lip curled. His growl deepened. Ethan's flashlight beam caught boot prints around them. Several, overlapping. Heavy tread. He looked up and swept the area. No movement, just fog and fences and the dark hulks of warehouses. But the prints pointed back toward the road in multiple paths, as if more than one person had left and they'd split up. Ethan pressed 2 fingers to the woman's wrist. Pulse. Fast. Weak. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, Unit 12, I have a female victim, conscious but injured. Request EMS priority. Possible assault. Start me another unit. Quiet arrival." Static. Then, "Copy. Unit 12, EMS, en route." The woman's eyes opened wider. They were startlingly clear for someone bleeding on concrete in river fog. She stared at Ethan's badge like it was a test. Then her gaze moved to Shadow. Something in her face shifted. Recognition, relief, fear all at once. Her lips moved. No sound at first. Ethan leaned closer. "Ma'am, I need your name." She swallowed, winced, forced it out. "Lena." "Lena what?" Her eyes drifted toward the hard drive, then back to Ethan. "Moore," she whispered. "Dr. Lena Moore." Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew that name. Brilliant chemist. Consultant for environmental forensics. Occasionally worked cases with the department when spills turned criminal. She tried to lift her hand toward the drive. Her fingers shook. Don't let them," she breathed. Ethan kept his voice calm. "Who, Lena? Who did this?" Her eyes went unfocused for a moment, like she was pulling the name out of pain. Then she said it, not loud, not dramatic, just a word that landed like a stone. "Vulov." Shadow's growl turned into something else, a warning with teeth behind it. Ethan felt the temperature drop again, even through his coat. "Vulov," he repeated, tasting it. He didn't know if it was a person, a company, a code name, but Lena Moore had bled to keep it in the world. Ethan scooped up the hard drive, careful not to smudge what might be fingerprints, and tucked it into an evidence bag from his kit. Then he shrugged off his outer jacket and draped it over her. "Stay with me," he said. "EMS is coming." Her eyes locked on his. "Watch, phones," she rasped. "If you call—" Her words broke into a cough that sent fresh blood across her lower lip. Ethan didn't flinch. He'd seen worse. But he'd also learned something more dangerous than blood. The moment someone warns you the system is compromised, you treat every breath like it's being overheard. "I hear you," he said quietly. "You don't have to talk right now." She fought for one more sentence anyway. "Not just me." Ethan leaned closer. "What?" She looked at Shadow, then Ethan again. "Everyone who tried already gone." Then her eyes rolled back and her body went limp. Shadow whined once, soft, almost hurt. Ethan exhaled through his nose and forced his mind into structure. Airway, breathing, circulation, scene safety. He scanned the fog again. Nothing. But he could feel it, like cold on the back of his neck, that someone might still be close enough to see the beam of his flashlight. Ethan pressed his hand lightly against Shadow's shoulder. "Shadow," he whispered. "Watch." Shadow's ears pivoted, scanning. Ethan stood with his back to the river, body angled to shield Lena, and waited for the sound of sirens to cut through the industrial quiet. They arrived 6 minutes later. Too long. And just long enough for Ethan to know whatever Lena Moore had stumbled into wasn't a simple assault. It was a message. And the fact that she'd held on to that hard drive like a lifeline meant she'd chosen her side. Now Ethan had to decide if he would too. The hospital lights were too bright. They made everything look clean when nothing was. Ethan stood just outside the trauma bay, hands clasped behind his back, watching the blur of movement. Nurses in blue, a doctor in a plastic face shield, the quick lift of Lena's body from gurney to bed, blood-stained hair, IV lines, an oxygen mask. Shadow sat beside Ethan, posture perfect, eyes fixed on the door like he could will it open and keep her alive through sheer loyalty. A nurse glanced at the dog and softened. "He can stay?" Ethan nodded. "He's calm." Shadow didn't move, didn't blink. Ethan understood him. Shadow wasn't calm. Shadow was ready. A set of footsteps approached from behind with purpose. Ethan didn't turn until he heard the voice. "Cole." Captain Maria Hayes. She didn't stride into rooms. She entered them like she belonged there, because she did. Mid-40s, hair pulled back tight, eyes that had seen too many nights like this and refused to become numb. "Captain," Ethan said. Her gaze flicked to Shadow, then to the trauma bay door. "That her?" "Dr. Lena Moore. Found her at the river intake. She was holding a hard drive." Hayes' mouth tightened. "She say anything?" "One word. Vulov." Hayes' expression didn't change much. She was trained not to show tells, but something sharpened behind her eyes. "Where's the drive?" Ethan tapped his chest. "Bagged, sealed, on my person." "Good." Hayes lowered her voice. "Ethan, you need to hear me clearly. We've had 2 internal affairs complaints in the last year disappear before they even got logged." Ethan held her gaze. Hayes continued, careful with each word. "I don't know if that's incompetence or interference, but I know this. If Moore said phones are watched, treat every channel like it's compromised." Ethan's jaw flexed. "So what? No calls?" Hayes shook her head. "Calls, but controlled. No names over the air. No emails. No assumptions that your badge makes you safe." Shadow's ears flicked at Hayes' tone. He understood urgency, even if he didn't understand words. The trauma bay door opened. A doctor stepped out, mask pulled down under her chin. "Officer Cole?" Ethan moved instantly. "Yes." "She's stabilized for now. Concussion, broken fibula, lacerations. She's tough, but you'll get maybe 10 minutes before she crashes." "Can I see her?" The doctor nodded. "One at a time. The dog—" Shadow stood as if on cue. Ethan's hand rested briefly on Shadow's neck. "Stay." Shadow didn't like it. Ethan felt the dog's tension in the way his muscles locked, but Shadow obeyed. Ethan followed the doctor in. Lena Moore looked smaller under hospital sheets. Not weak, just human. Her face was bruised along the cheekbone, and a neat line of stitches cut across her hairline. Her eyes opened when Ethan approached, as if she'd been waiting for his footsteps specifically. "You came," she whispered. "I found you," Ethan corrected gently. "You're alive because you held on." Her lips twitched, almost a smile, more like disbelief. "Barely." Ethan pulled a chair close and kept his voice low. "Lena, you said Vulov. Is that a person?" Her gaze slid to the corner of the room where a security camera blinked. Then back to Ethan. "Not here." Ethan didn't ask why, he just nodded. She swallowed. "They monitor hospital feeds. Not supposed to, but—" "Money makes rules." Ethan felt a flare of anger rise, hot, immediate. He crushed it down the way he'd been trained to. Anger was useful only when it served a plan. "What did you find?" he asked. Lena stared at the ceiling for a long beat, gathering herself. "Rare earth extraction. Not legal, not permitted, not safe." Ethan's mind clicked forward. "Mining?" "Not in the way people picture." Her voice was thin but precise. "Leaching. Chemical wash. You don't need a big open pit if you poison the ground quietly and move material out at night." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Where?" "The riverfront site." She exhaled. "They're using the intake channel as cover. Noise, machinery, constant movement, and the runoff—" Her voice caught, and for the first time Ethan saw fear break through her control. "The runoff is getting into the water." Ethan felt his stomach drop. "How long?" he asked. "Months, maybe longer." She looked at him sharply. "And if I'm right, they're not just stealing minerals. They're laundering money through permits and cleanup contracts signed by people who should be in prison." Ethan leaned in. "Do you have proof?" Lena's eyes flicked to his chest. "The drive." "I have it." "Good." She breathed out, and for a moment it looked like relief might actually loosen her pain. Then her expression hardened again. "But it's not enough. Not if they bury it." "We won't." Lena's eyes locked on him like she was weighing his soul. "You don't understand. They tried once already. I reported irregular discharge. The report got lost. I filed again. My supervisor was reassigned. I went to a city inspector. He stopped returning calls." Ethan didn't interrupt. She continued. "If you do this wrong, you don't just lose a case, you lose people, you lose careers, you lose—" She swallowed hard. "Your dog." Ethan's gaze sharpened. "They threatened Shadow?" "They don't have to say it." Lena's voice dropped. "They just have to know you love him." Ethan felt something cold settle behind his ribs. "You said, not just me. Everyone who tried is already gone." "Who?" Lena's eyes glistened. 2 lab techs, 1 inspector, a contractor who refused to falsify readings." She blinked, and a tear slipped sideways. "Gone. Not dead on paper, just disappeared into paperwork." Ethan sat back slightly. "Okay?" Lena frowned, weakly suspicious. "Okay." He kept his voice steady. "Okay means I hear you, and I'm not going to charge in loud and alone and get you killed twice." Lena stared at him like she wasn't used to that kind of response. Ethan continued. "We lock evidence, we duplicate, we build a chain that can't be cut, and if they try to silence you, we make it louder." Her throat bobbed. "How?" Ethan's eyes went to the door where he knew Hayes waited. "With Captain Hayes, with my rookie, with Shadow, and with the truth distributed, time-stamped, undeniable." Lena's eyelids fluttered. Pain tugged at her. "I installed hidden cameras in my lab. If I didn't check in by midnight, they upload automatically, but I never finished the trigger." Ethan leaned forward. "Where's the lab?" "East side, 2 floors above a closed clinic. You'll see the keypad. Code is—" Her voice faltered. Ethan held up a hand. "Don't say it." Lena's eyes widened slightly. Ethan nodded toward the camera in the corner again. "Write it when you can, or tell me when you're alone with me and there's no feed." Lena looked like she wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. "You're different than the last cop I called." Ethan didn't smile. The last cop didn't have Shadow. From outside the room, Shadow barked once, sharp like he'd heard his name and demanded acknowledgement. Lena's eyes softened. "Good dog." Ethan rose. "Rest. I'm going to talk to Captain Hayes. When I come back, we make a plan you can survive." Lena grabbed his sleeve weakly. "Officer, Ethan?" He paused. "Yeah?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "They want signatures. Paper trails. They don't always need bodies." Ethan's expression tightened. "They're going to try to make me sign something." Lena nodded, exhausted. "Or make you make me sign something." Ethan gently freed his sleeve. "They won't." He stepped out, and the hospital corridor felt colder than the river. Hayes was waiting exactly where he expected. "Well?" Ethan's jaw set. "It's real. Chemical leaching, water contamination, money laundering, disappearances." Hayes inhaled slowly like she was preparing to carry something heavy. "Then we handle it clean." Ethan nodded once. "And quiet." Hayes looked at Shadow. "Your dog's going to be in the middle of this." Shadow stared back, unblinking, as if the captain had just stated the obvious. Hayes lowered her voice. "I'm going to bring in Deputy Lucas Reed. He's green, but he's sharp, and he's not bought yet." Ethan's mouth tightened at the word yet. Hayes saw it. "We don't have the luxury of trusting no one. We have the luxury of trusting carefully." Ethan looked down at Shadow, then back at Hayes. "Then we build a chain," he said, "one they can't cut." Hayes's eyes hardened with approval. "Good, because if Lena's right, we're not just chasing criminals." She leaned closer. "We're stepping into a machine." "And machines didn't stop because you asked. They stopped when you jammed the gears." Deputy Lucas Reed looked younger than the badge suggested. Not reckless young, not naive young. Just knew enough that the weight of the job hadn't pressed permanent lines into his face yet. He stood in the dim squad room that night, sleeves rolled up, laptop open, eyes moving fast across 3 screens while Ethan and Captain Hayes watched. Shadow lay under the table, head on his paws, but his ears tracked every shift in tone. "Okay," Lucas said, fingers flying. "Dr. Moore's consulting contracts, legit. City-level environmental audits, state advisory boards, some federal grants. Clean. But," he tapped a key. "Here." A map bloomed across the screen. Red dots clustered along the riverfront industrial zone. "These are recent emergency remediation permits approved in the last 6 months," Lucas said. "All signed by different departments, all rushed through." Hayes leaned in. "How rushed?" "Average turnaround on a remediation permit is 21 days, Lucas replied. "These? 48 hours, sometimes less." Ethan's jaw tightened. "What company?" Lucas zoomed in on the permit holder. "Vulov Industrial Holdings." The name landed in the room like a weight. Hayes didn't react visibly, but Ethan saw the calculation behind her eyes. "That's a regional logistics and extraction group," she said evenly. "Private security contracts, industrial cleanup, political donors." Lucas nodded. "They donate to 3 county commissioners and," he swallowed lightly, "the sheriff's re-election fund." Silence. Shadow lifted his head slightly. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Okay." Lucas blinked. "Okay?" Ethan met his eyes. "Okay means we don't panic. We build." Hayes nodded once in approval. Lucas straightened, visibly grounding himself. "Right, build." Ethan moved behind him. Lena said she had hidden cameras in her lab. Lucas pulled up a floor plan. East Side Clinic building, top floor. It's technically listed as a closed pediatric rehab center. "Technically?" Hayes asked. "Utilities still active. Security service registered to," Lucas typed, "a shell corp under Vulov Industrial." Hayes' mouth flattened. "Of course it is." Ethan's mind ticked forward. "They'll expect someone to go for the lab." Lucas glanced up. "So we don't?" Ethan shook his head. "We do, but not loud." Hayes folded her arms. "Outline it." Ethan stepped back and spoke like he was mapping a breach. "Step 1, duplicate Lena's hard drive here. Offline, no network access. 3 encrypted copies." Lucas nodded. "Air-gapped system. I can set that up." "Step 2, Ethan continued. "Retrieve the lab footage quietly. No radio chatter, no marked vehicles." Hayes added, "And we assume internal leaks, so no formal evidence log until it's federal." Lucas hesitated. "That's not standard." Hayes met his eyes calmly. Neither is a corporation poisoning our water and bribing half the county." Lucas swallowed, then nodded. "Understood." Shadow rose as Ethan straightened. The dog sensed it, the shift from research to movement. Ethan rested a hand briefly on Shadow's back. "We move in 20. The canyon road cut like a scar through the hills east of town. No street lights, no houses, just rock walls and snowbanks and a strip of asphalt that felt too narrow even in daylight." Ethan drove unmarked. Lucas sat in the back seat with the equipment case, hunched over his laptop, verifying encryption protocols. Hayes followed in a separate vehicle 10 minutes behind, far enough to avoid a visible convoy, close enough to respond. Shadow sat upright in the passenger seat, head slightly angled toward the windshield. Halfway through the canyon, Shadow's ears snapped forward. Ethan felt it before he saw it. The road ahead curved sharply left, and just beyond the curve, barely visible in the headlights, was a dark shape across the asphalt. A truck, parked sideways, blocking both lanes. Ethan didn't brake hard. He eased off the gas, controlled, eyes scanning the rock faces. "Lucas," he said quietly. "Head down, no lights." Lucas froze. "That's not good." "No," Ethan agreed. "It's not." Shadow's growl began low and steady. The truck doors opened. 2 figures stepped out first, then a third from behind the vehicle. All masked, all wearing tactical jackets. One raised a hand, not waving, signaling. Ethan's mind snapped into structure. Ambush. No random criminals blocked a canyon road at midnight. He shifted into reverse, slowly. A second pair of headlights flared in the mirror. Another vehicle behind them. Boxed. Lucas's voice came thin but controlled. "Ethan." "I see it." Shadow's body leaned forward, muscles coiled. One of the masked men stepped closer and lifted something in his hand. Not a rifle, a clipboard. Ethan's eyes narrowed. The man called out through a voice modulator, "Officer Cole, step out of the vehicle." Lucas whispered, "They know your name." Of course they did. Ethan lowered his window halfway, but kept his seatbelt on. "Identify yourselves," he said evenly. The masked man laughed softly. "We're here to offer you a solution." Ethan's gaze flicked to the side rock wall, angles, distance, cover. "What solution?" he asked. The clipboard lifted higher. "Sign a statement," the masked voice continued. "Dr. Moore falsified data, fabricated contamination reports. You acted in good faith, responding to her delusion." Lucas's breath hitched. The masked man continued. "You sign it, we walk away. Everyone goes home." Ethan felt something cold settle in his spine. "They don't want a body," he murmured to Lucas. Lucas whispered back, "They want the paper." The man outside tilted his head. "You're a smart officer, Cole. We'd prefer not to escalate." Shadow's growl deepened. Ethan spoke calmly. "You block a public road with armed men and call that not escalating?" The masked man shrugged. "Think of it as preemptive paperwork." Ethan glanced in the mirror again. The second vehicle behind them idled, engine rumbling low. 3 up front, at least 2 behind. Unknown total. Ethan unlatched his seatbelt quietly. "Shadow," he whispered. The dog's ears twitched. "Wait!" The masked man stepped closer. "Step out of the vehicle, Officer Cole." Ethan opened his door slowly and stepped into the cold. Lucas stayed down, heart pounding so loud he was sure it was audible. The masked man extended the clipboard. Just a signature. Ethan didn't take it. "Where's your badge?" he asked. The masked man chuckled. "We don't need one." Ethan nodded slowly. "Right." The second masked figure shifted slightly. Weight transferred to his front foot. Ethan saw it. Attack posture. Shadow exploded from the SUV before Ethan even finished the command. "Shadow!" Too late. The dog launched like a missile, slamming into the second masked man's chest and driving him backward into the snowbank. The man's weapon clattered onto the asphalt. Chaos snapped open. Ethan moved instantly, closing the distance to the clipboard holder before the others could draw. He drove his forearm into the man's throat, pivoted, and shoved him into the side of the blocking truck. The third masked attacker reached for his sidearm. Lucas popped up in the back seat and shouted, "Gun!" The distraction was enough. Ethan kicked the weapon out of the man's grip and shoved him into the first attacker, still grappling with Shadow. The rear vehicle doors flew open. 2 more masked men rushed forward. Ethan stepped back, hands raised slightly. "Stop," he said loudly. "You don't want this on record." The masked men hesitated, just enough to reveal the truth. They weren't here to kill him, not yet. The clipboard man coughed, clutching his throat. This was the easy way. Ethan's eyes were ice. There is no easy way. The man's head tilted. Then the hard way it is. Headlights flared behind the attackers. Hayes's vehicle. The masked men saw it too. They didn't engage. They retreated. Fast. Disciplined. Within seconds, they were back in their trucks, engines roaring, tires spitting snow as they reversed and peeled away into the canyon. Silence slammed down. Lucas stumbled out of the SUV, pale. What just happened? Shadow trotted back to Ethan, jaws red with a shallow bite, but eyes bright. Ethan knelt briefly, scanning the dog. You good? Shadow barked once. Ethan rose slowly. They wanted a signature. Lucas stared at the empty road. They could have shot. They didn't want to, Ethan replied. Not yet. Hayes stepped out of her vehicle, shotgun in hand. Report? Ethan's voice was flat. They tried to force a false statement blaming Lena. Hayes' jaw tightened, which means they're scared of what's on that drive. Shadow gave a low growl, staring into the dark canyon. Ethan followed his gaze. They won't ask twice, he said quietly. Lena's lab sat above the abandoned clinic exactly where she'd said. 2 floors, dark windows, frost clinging to the frames. Ethan disabled the keypad lock in under a minute, using the code Lena had scrawled shakily on a notepad before passing out. Inside, the lab smelled faintly of ethanol and metal. Lucas moved straight to the workstation. If the auto-upload wasn't completed, the footage is still local. Shadow paced once around the room, nose working. Ethan stood near the door, watching angles. Lucas's fingers flew. I've got it, he whispered. Multiple camera feeds, time-stamped, night footage. The screen flickered. Grainy video filled the display. Masked men inside the lab 3 nights earlier, searching, destroying equipment. One of them removed his mask briefly to wipe sweat from his face. Lucas froze the frame. Zoom. The image sharpened. Clear enough. Ethan memorized the face. Professional. Cold. Lucas swallowed. We can ID him. Ethan nodded. Copy everything, now. Lucas started the duplication process. Shadow's head snapped toward the stairwell. Ethan heard it a split second later. Footsteps. Not hurried, measured. Then a voice from below. Officer Cole, we know you're up there. Lucas's hands stilled over the keyboard. Ethan stepped away from the door and positioned himself beside the wall. The voice continued, amplified slightly. You had your chance in the canyon. Lucas whispered, How do they know? They never stopped watching, Ethan said quietly. The voice below softened, almost kindly. Sign the statement, walk out, no one gets hurt. Ethan glanced at Lucas. How long? 3 minutes for full duplication, Lucas whispered. Shadow's growl rose again. The footsteps multiplied, multiple entries. Ethan closed his eyes for half a second, then opened them. Calm. They didn't want a body, he said softly. Lucas nodded. Now? Ethan's gaze went to the door. Now, he replied, they want to make an example. Shadow shifted into a ready stance. Ethan moved to the main light panel. He killed every light in the lab. Darkness swallowed the room, and below someone said sharply, Move! The siege had begun. Darkness changes a room. It doesn't just remove sight, it removes certainty. In the lab above the abandoned clinic, the only light left came from Lucas Reed's laptop screen. A cold rectangle of blue that painted his face like he was underwater. Ethan Cole stood 3 steps to the left of the door, shoulder pressed to the wall. Rifle. No, not a rifle. He didn't have one. Just his duty weapon and a spare magazine tucked into his vest. That mattered. This wasn't a war zone with resupply and teams. This was home ground, and home ground had rules. Contain, document, survive. Shadow sat at Ethan's heel, perfectly still, muscles quivering with contained violence. The dog's eyes tracked the doorway as if he could see through the wood. Lucas whispered, 3 minutes. Ethan didn't look at him. 2. Lucas blinked. The transfer says, I'm counting breathing, Ethan said. Below, the footsteps spread across the stairwell with the methodical patience of professionals. No yelling, no panic, just the sound of bodies moving into positions. Then the voice came again, now closer, echoing up the stairwell. Officer Cole, last offer. Ethan kept his voice low, speaking more to Shadow than to the men below. Stay. Shadow's ears flicked back in acknowledgement. He didn't like it, but he understood. The voice continued. "Sign the statement. We leave. You keep your career. You keep your dog." The mention of Shadow was deliberate. Lucas's breath hitched. Ethan felt heat flash behind his sternum. Anger, protective instinct. He crushed it down like a cigarette under a boot. "You're too late," Ethan said aloud, calm and carrying just enough to reach them. "Everything's copied." A beat of silence. Then a chuckle, almost admiring. "Good," the voice said. "Then you'll understand why we can't let you walk out." A metallic sound scraped below, like a crowbar biting into a latch. Shadow's growl rose. Ethan placed his hand on the dog's neck, not to restrain him, but to anchor them both. He could feel Shadow's heartbeat under his palm. Fast, ready. "Lucas," Ethan whispered, "when it finishes, you send the package." Lucas swallowed. "To who?" Ethan's eyes stayed on the door. "Everyone." Lucas stared at him. "Captain Hayes said, she said a public trigger if we're silenced." Ethan's voice was a blade. "This is the trigger." Lucas's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Okay." A loud crack from below, the stairwell door giving way. Then the first heavy boot on the steps. Ethan moved 1 inch closer to the doorframe, aligning his body with the angle where the door would open, minimizing his silhouette, maximizing his line of fire if needed. Shadow shifted, front paws spread, ready to launch. Ethan whispered, almost affectionately, "Not yet." Lucas whispered, "1 minute." Ethan exhaled once, slow. He didn't need to see them to know how they'd come. 2-man stack at the doorway, one covering, one pushing. They'd expect panic. They'd expect a cop to shout warnings. Ethan gave them neither. The handle turned, the door swung inward, and the first man stepped through. Shadow hit him like a freight train. No bark, no hesitation, just a black and tan missile of muscle and teeth. The man screamed as Shadow's jaws clamped onto his forearm, twisting the weapon away before it could fire. The gun clattered to the floor. Ethan moved. He didn't shoot. Not yet. He grabbed the attacker's collar with one hand, slammed him back into the hallway wall, and drove his elbow into the man's jaw. The attacker folded. Shadow released on command, automatic, trained, then repositioned between the doorway and Lucas like the world's most lethal shield. Ethan heard the second man recoil back into the stairwell. He heard him shout, "Dog!" Then the voice, colder now, sharper, "Push!" 2 more sets of boots. They didn't rush in blindly now. They adjusted. Ethan felt the shift in their tactics the way you feel the pressure change before a storm. They weren't afraid. They were adapting. A beam of light sliced through the doorway, someone flicking on a weapon-mounted flashlight from below. They were trying to paint targets. Ethan backed off the door angle and flattened into the darkness, letting their light search empty air. Lucas's laptop screen was still glowing. Too obvious. Ethan hissed, "Kill it." Lucas's eyes widened. "But the transfer—" "Kill the screen. Feel for the keys." Lucas swallowed, but he did it, closing the laptop just enough to darken the glow, then working by memory and the faint ambient light from the hallway. The stairwell light swept again, then stopped. They were listening now. Shadow's ears rotated forward. A soft clink. Ethan's blood went cold. Not a bullet. Something small and metal. A canister. Ethan lunged for Lucas. "Down!" The canister bounced through the doorway and rolled across the lab floor. A hiss. Then a thick white cloud erupted, swallowing the lab in chemical fog. Smoke. Professional. Not meant to burn. Meant to blind, disorient, force movement. Shadow snarled. Lucas coughed hard. "Ethan?" "Mask," Ethan snapped. Lucas fumbled for the emergency respirator hanging by the lab sink. Ethan had one too. Lena's lab was full of chemical protocols. He yanked it on, tightened the straps. Shadow didn't have a mask. Ethan's stomach dropped. He grabbed Shadow's harness and pulled the dog tight against his leg, shielding his face in the crook of Ethan's knee as much as he could. "Shadow, stay," Ethan commanded with more force than before. Shadow whined, a short, angry sound, like he hated being held back. Ethan's voice softened slightly, just for him. "Trust me." Boots hit the hallway. Now they were coming in under cover of smoke. Ethan could barely see his own hand. He could hear them, though, a soft scrape of fabric. A breath. They were close. Ethan moved left, dragging Shadow with him, using the lab benches as cover. He pressed his shoulder into the edge of the counter, trying to make himself part of the furniture. Lucas's cough sounded too loud. Ethan reached back and clamped a hand over Lucas's mouth. Lucas's eyes widened, then he nodded. Silence. Then a voice, muffled by respirator filters, just beyond the bench. "Where is it?" Another voice. "On him or the kid?" They were inside. Ethan could not risk a blind gunfight in a chemical lab full of glass and unknown substances. One stray round could shatter a container and turn this room into a poison chamber. That was exactly why they'd chosen this location. If Ethan fought, he risked killing everyone. Ethan's mind raced. Contain, control, leverage. Lucas's hand trembled on the closed laptop. Ethan leaned close to Lucas's ear. "How long?" Lucas mouthed, barely audible. 20 seconds. Ethan nodded once. Shadow's body vibrated with restrained fury. He could smell them, taste their sweat in the smoke. Ethan felt Shadow's teeth graze his glove, accidental, restless, like a loaded spring. "Shadow," Ethan whispered, "on my signal." Shadow's ears flicked. Ethan listened to the attackers' footfalls, 2 in the room, maybe a third in the hall. He heard one of them step too close to a glass cabinet, a faint tap. Ethan used it. He grabbed a metal tray from the counter and hurled it across the room into the smoke. It clanged loudly against a steel sink. The attackers turned instantly, lights swinging. Ethan didn't shoot. He moved. He surged forward through the smoke and drove his shoulder into the closest attacker's torso, using pure force and momentum. The man staggered back, hit a bench, and Ethan pinned him there. Shadow launched at the second attacker, clamping onto the man's thigh this time, dragging him down. A weapon fired once, wild, blind, shattering glass somewhere above. Lucas screamed, "Stop shooting!" Ethan snarled, "Control it!" He ripped the first attacker's gun free and shoved it away, then slammed the man's head into the bench. Shadow's attacker fell hard, struggling against the dog. Ethan heard another set of boots rush in from the hall. 3 in the room now. Ethan's lungs burned behind the respirator. Then Lucas's voice came, thin, shaking but clear. "Sent!" The word hit Ethan like oxygen. The evidence package was out, distributed, time-stamped, and now it didn't matter if Ethan lived or died. The truth would survive, and that changed everything. One of them shouted, panicked now, "He sent it!" The leader's voice snapped, furious. "Then we burn the rest. Phones, drives, everything." Ethan felt the shift again. They weren't focused on signatures anymore. They were in damage control. They reached for the laptop. Lucas jerked back. Ethan moved between them, weapon raised. "Back away," Ethan said, voice like stone. The leader's flashlight beam found Ethan's eyes through the smoke. "You think you're a hero?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't have to. Shadow's teeth answered for him. Shadow surged forward and slammed into the leader's leg, forcing him down. The leader cursed, fought, tried to shove the dog off. Ethan fired one shot into the floor, not to hit, but to stop. The crack reverberated off glass and tile. Everyone froze for half a second. Ethan used that half second. He grabbed the leader by the collar and yanked him away from Shadow, slamming him into the wall. He pressed his gun to the man's chest, not to kill, but to command. "Call them off," Ethan said. The leader laughed through his respirator. "You can't?" Ethan leaned in. "You're in a lab full of chemicals, on camera in the middle of a live evidence drop. You're done." The leader's eyes narrowed. "What cameras?" Ethan didn't smile, but his voice sharpened. "Dr. Lena Moore is smarter than you." The leader's gaze flicked around, suddenly suspicious of every corner, every vent, every smoke detector. He realized he might already be filmed. And if the evidence drop had gone out, then every second they stayed was another nail. Outside, distant sirens began to wail. Not close yet, but close enough. The leader's breathing quickened. "Retreat." One of the attackers hesitated. "We can still—" "Retreat," the leader snapped. They began pulling back. Shadow strained to chase, but Ethan held him, gripping the harness hard. "Stay," Ethan commanded again. Shadow whined, furious. Ethan's voice softened. "We hold, we don't chase. Not here." The smoke thinned slowly. Shapes resolved into reality again. 2 attackers dragged their stunned teammate toward the stairwell. The leader limped, one pant leg torn, blood dark against the fabric. He stopped at the doorway and turned back. His eyes locked on Ethan. "You just made yourself a problem," he said. Ethan met his gaze without blinking. "I was already a problem." The leader's eyes flicked to Shadow. "Your dog, too." Ethan's voice went colder. "Touch him and you'll learn what consequences look like." The leader stared one more beat, then vanished down the stairs. Silence returned, broken only by Lucas's ragged breathing and the faint hiss of the dissipating smoke canister. Ethan lowered his gun. His hands were steady. His heart was not. Lucas sank to his knees, coughing, eyes wet. We did it?" Ethan exhaled hard. "We did the only thing that mattered." Shadow pressed his head into Ethan's thigh, whining softly now. Not panic, not fear. A check-in. Ethan knelt and cupped Shadow's face with both gloved hands. "You okay?" he murmured, scanning the dog's gums, his eyes, his legs for blood. Shadow licked his glove once. Ethan's throat tightened. Then Hayes's voice crackled through Ethan's private radio, low power, encrypted. "Cole, I'm 2 blocks out. Units are converging. Federal's been notified. You alive?" Ethan pressed the transmit. "Alive. Evidence is out. They breached and pulled back." Hayes's voice sharpened. "Hold! Don't move! Federal response is inbound." Ethan looked at Lucas, still kneeling, shaking. "Lucas," Ethan said quietly, "you did good." Lucas blinked up at him, like he couldn't believe the words. "I thought I was going to die." Ethan nodded once. "So did I." Outside, sirens grew louder. This time, they didn't fade away. They came closer and closer. And then, finally, the world arrived. The lab filled with bodies in vests and badges. Not local uniforms. Not familiar faces. Federal. Special Agent Patricia Walsh stepped through the doorway like she'd been carved out of granite. She didn't ask for explanations first. She took in the scene. Smoke residue. Broken glass. One unconscious attacker in cuffs. Hayes' officers had intercepted him on the stairs when he lagged behind. Ethan standing with Shadow at his heel. Lucas leaning against the counter, pale but upright. "Officer Ethan Cole," Walsh said, reading him like a report. "K9 Shadow." Ethan didn't flinch at the formality. "Yes, ma'am." Walsh's gaze flicked to the hard drive bagged on the counter. "We received the package." Lucas swallowed. "It went through?" "It went everywhere," Walsh replied. "Federal tip lines, 3 major outlets, 2 watchdog orgs, and a state attorney who hates corruption more than he loves sleep." A faint, almost imperceptible curve touched Walsh's mouth. It wasn't a smile. It was satisfaction. Hayes stepped in behind Walsh. Her eyes moved to Ethan and Shadow, checking, counting limbs. She gave one small nod. "You did exactly what you were supposed to," Hayes said. Ethan exhaled. "We're not done." Walsh's eyes sharpened. "No, we're just past the point where they can bury it." Walsh turned to her team. "Secure the scene. Chain of custody now. Full forensic sweep. Identify every fingerprint, every boot print, every breath in this room." Agents moved instantly. Efficient, professional. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest, just a notch, because for the first time since the river intake, he believed they might actually win this. Walsh looked at Ethan again. "Your doctor, Lena Moore, where is she?" "Under guard at Mercy General," Hayes answered. "I assigned 2 officers I trust." Walsh nodded. "Good. We're moving her to protective custody within the hour." Ethan's jaw tightened. "They said her name on the canyon road. They know everything." Walsh's voice was flat. "They know because somebody told them. We'll find out who." Lucas flinched. "Internal?" Walsh didn't soften. "Always assume internal." Hayes's gaze cut to Lucas. "That's why you were in this, Reed, because we needed someone whose conscience isn't negotiable." Lucas swallowed, straightening like those words were armor. "Yes, ma'am." Walsh walked toward Ethan, stopping close enough that her voice could drop without being overheard. "You did something tonight most people don't understand," she said. Ethan didn't answer. Walsh continued anyway. "You didn't just fight. You made the truth hard to kill." Ethan looked down at Shadow. The dog's ears were still alert, but his body leaned gently into Ethan's leg. "You got my dog involved," Ethan said quietly. Not accusation, just reality. Walsh held his gaze. "They got your dog involved. You ended it." Ethan felt that land. He nodded once. "Get me to my doctor," he said, "and my partner needs a check." Walsh's eyes flicked to Shadow. "Medical will assess him." And Cole, Ethan looked up. Walsh's voice hardened. "Once this starts rolling downhill, it doesn't stop. You're going to be pulled into hearings, depositions, threats. They'll try to smear you." Ethan's expression didn't change. "Let them." Walsh watched him for a long beat, then nodded. "Good." Lena Moore didn't look like a warrior in her hospital bed. She looked like someone who'd been forced to be one. Walsh stood at the foot of the bed, explaining protection protocols. Hayes stood beside her, arms folded. Ethan took the chair closest to Lena. Shadow lay at his feet. Lena's eyes opened when she heard Ethan's voice. "You sent it," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "It's out." Lena stared at him, disbelief cracking into relief. "They can't—" "Bury it," Ethan finished. "Not anymore." Her eyes filled. She turned her face slightly, trying to hide the tear like it was weakness. Ethan didn't call it out. He just stayed. Hayes spoke quietly. "Dr. Moore, you're being moved tonight. New location, new security, no local involvement." Lena's voice was thin. "Thank you," Walsh added. "You'll testify when the time comes. But you live first." Lena's gaze moved to Shadow. The dog lifted his head slightly. "Thank you," Lena whispered to the dog. Shadow's tail thumped once. Ethan's throat tightened, but he kept his face calm. Because this wasn't about emotion, not outwardly. But inside, Ethan felt the mission shift. They weren't just protecting a witness now. They were protecting a truth that could clean a river, save a city, and dismantle a machine. The arrest started before dawn. Not dramatic, no TV helicopters, just federal warrants executed with quiet efficiency. Vulov Industrial Holdings offices raided, servers seized, accounts frozen. Contractors arrested on conspiracy and assault charges. And one by one, the people who'd assumed they were untouchable realized what it felt like when the gears jammed. Ethan didn't watch the news. He stood outside the protective wing while Lena was moved, hand on Shadow's harness, eyes scanning every corridor. Hayes approached him as the transport team loaded Lena into an unmarked ambulance. "You did good," she said again. Ethan's voice was low. "We did." Hayes' eyes softened for half a second. "Reed's rattled, but he'll be fine. You gave him something." Ethan glanced toward Lucas, who stood near the wall, pale but upright, watching federal agents with the wide-eyed focus of someone who'd just learned the world had teeth. "What did I give him?" Ethan asked. Hayes' voice was quiet. "Proof that doing the right thing isn't just a speech, it's a decision you make when it costs." Ethan nodded once. Hayes continued. "And Cole, this is how you change the city. Not with a headline, with a chain of actions that leaves no room for lies." Ethan looked down at Shadow. Shadow looked back. Silent communication. Trust. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Some people think courage is pulling a trigger," Ethan said. Hayes watched him. Ethan's voice stayed calm. "But tonight was different." Hayes nodded. "Tonight was building a system that survives you." Ethan's jaw set. "That's the only justice that lasts." Hayes rested a hand briefly on Shadow's head. Shadow allowed it, barely. Then Hayes looked back at Ethan. "Go home. Sleep. You're going to need your strength." Ethan didn't argue, because he knew she was right, and because for the first time in a long time, home didn't feel like a place he might lose overnight. He walked out with Shadow beside him, Lucas trailing behind. The night air was still cold, but it felt cleaner somehow, like the city had taken its first real breath. And somewhere, deep inside a machine that had been grinding people down in silence, gears began to snap. Not from a bullet, from truth, made public, made durable, made impossible to erase.